Welcome back to another edition of Byline with Ben Dennis. Beyond the headlines, making sense of them without spin. That is the goal of what we do here. The elections are over in Virginia, New Jersey, California, and New York. Now what? Well, we'll be voting again in 2026 and for the Congressional midterms. Hotly contested races are up for grabs in the United States House of Representatives and the Senate. Will the Democrats be able to clinch power in the legislative branch nationally? If they do, how big is the margin going to be? If they don't, does Donald Trump's remaining years of his second term not necessarily become a lame duck presidency? We will have to see. Today, I dive in with Rich Marr. He is a political science professor in Virginia at Randolph-Macon College in Central Virginia. I go back several years with Rich during my time reporting in Richmond, Virginia, where we dove into local issues and national issues. He has a great sense of what's happening on the ground from the voter, behind the scenes from elected representatives, of what they're working on right now ahead of 2026 and those midterms. We dive into what issues worked for Democrats, what did not. Same for Republicans. What worked for them? What did not? We know that in these races within the last week and a half, Democrats largely won these major contests. Abigail Spanberger in Virginia won some 15 points over the Republican nominee, current Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earl-Sears. Mikey Sherrill just won the governor's mansion in New Jersey, the Democrat. She also won big over the Republican nominee, Jack Ciattarelli, who lost this race by a larger margin than the last time he ran 4 years ago. And he got more votes this time around. I asked Rich what surprised him here, what he thought was predictable, and also how voters might be reacting to the government shutdown right now that it is over. Hey, good news. We made it out, everybody, alive. Will the next one come about? And when? That's the bigger question. Now that the funding bill keeps the government open and breathing through the end of January, after my conversation with Rich, diving into those SNAP benefits that are going to start coming back online, some states have filled the void, but there might be some transactional issues getting the remainder of what people are owed right now, as well as the lingering debate about healthcare. We're also going to talk about Venezuela and the United States ramping up their tensions in the Caribbean. More military assets are being added after the United States started bombing alleged drug boats. We're also going to talk about AI and music. There's a new survey out showing that nearly everyone who was surveyed in the United States, the UK, and in France could not discern what was an AI-generated song and what was not. So with that, let's dive into my conversation with Rich Marr of Randolph-Macon College. Welcome to Byline, Rich Marr.
Great to be here, Ben. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. And, we have a history back in Virginia. My days covering Richmond politics, state politics. Republicans like to say that Virginia is a blue state, but, a lot of us would argue, including I'm sure yourself, it's still a purple state. We just saw what happened 4 years ago, Governor Glenn Youngkin getting elected, and even the attorney general's race that happened this year was a lot closer than the gubernatorial, and I want to dive into that. So let's dissect. We are over a week after November's elections in Virginia, New Jersey, California, and New York City. Dive in. What do you think your biggest takeaways were of why Democrats came out on top, but also had this wide margin in the Virginia gubernatorial as well as the New Jersey gubernatorial?
Yeah, it's 2017 all over again. Right, so we've been talking, us political science people have been talking for a long time about the nationalization of state elections, right? That state elections are being much more affected by what's going on in the national scene than they used to be. And I think the sort of the lighter fluid on that fire is Donald Trump, right? So Donald Trump has accelerated the nationalization of state elections. So yeah, there's a Virginia election and there's a New Jersey election and there's this mayoral election in New York, but all of it is being shaped by who's in the White House, and particularly because of this particular guy who's in the White House. So this election was all about Trump. And yeah, individuals matter and who you run as a candidate and what they say and how much money they make. So I don't want to say like that nothing matters. I could run for governor and win in a year like this, although I don't know with how big the margin was. Maybe I could have, but I think you need to think about the sort of broad influence here. It's definitely about that national politics and about that guy, Donald Trump.
And do you think also, I mean, some of the exit polls handedly point to the economy too. Any president, whether they have their hand on the scales in terms of what affects people's pocketbook, whether or not that is true 100% of the time, people tend to tie the president to just the general pulse of the economy as well, right?
Absolutely. Like it's a classic idea in American politics, right? We always say that people vote their pocketbook, and it's not quite that simple and certainly not that simple anymore, but it's a big, big part of how they vote. And so, because the economy is all about perception too, right? Because on a number of economic measures, things are actually going pretty well in the economy this year. It's that people feel it badly, right? Prices are still super high. It's still $8 for a box of cornflakes. And I don't think people are used to that. And I think there's also this fear, right? This chaos that's happening in Washington, and people don't know, right? There's all these tariffs and we're feeling like costs are still high. So yeah, the economy's doing okay as far as unemployment. The economy's doing okay. The stock market is doing pretty well. But I think individuals, consumers, right? People, just normal individuals, homeowners, right? Renters, people working wage jobs, they're feeling like things cost too much. They're worried about the future. So that definitely got laid at Trump's doorstep.
Previous conversation I had, it was the initial one-on-one I had on this podcast on Byline, was with Peter Loge of George Washington University. He has this Center for Ethics and Political Communication. Certainly, one would argue that has utmost importance right now with people going at each other neck and neck. I want to ask, though, you had mentioned that voters are now voting with national issues in mind. And my conversation with Peter, he had said that he doesn't think that's a very good idea. When you're running for Congress, you should be talking about the roads, the stop signs, the intersections. Why do you think that voters, if this argument is true, have now gone to the ballot box increasingly in recent years on national issues versus on hyper local issues?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? And I'm a local politics guy. I love to talk about city elections and what's happening in your county as being probably more important than what's happening at the national level to you. But I just think that our discourse and the way people think about politics, I hate to talk about the discourse, right? But it is really that way, is all about Trump, right? What's Trump doing? Your identity even, right? In this polarized environment, people are flying Trump flags or Biden Harris flags. I mean, Trump particularly, I think, because he inspires this kind of cult of personality, the way he has kind of taken over the Republican Party. It's a lot about him and people invested in him. And so I think it becomes this kind of like identity for you. So it's less important about like what you're doing. Are you going to fix the potholes? Are you going to change the permitting process in the city? Are you going to reduce the property tax? It's more about like, are you my guy? Are you my person? Are you from my tribe or not? And so that Trump really plays into that politics, right? Because that's kind of how he engenders support by talking about people that way. So I just think it is a mix of the actual things that people are going to do and more of this like, is this my person or is this not my person?
Ask you what surprised you about the election this year. I want to bring up the New Jersey governor's race where the Republican nominee, Jack Ciattarelli, lost by a larger margin than he did during the previous gubernatorial election, though he gained reportedly 100,000 additional votes this time, but he lost by a larger margin. So what surprised you in several of these top ticket races across the country this time around?
Yeah, I think it was just the scale of Democratic enthusiasm, and we should, the Jersey thing was a little different than what happened in Virginia. In Virginia, like the kind of vote totals were similar, I think, to 21. It was just that Republicans stayed home and Democrats came out. So it's like sort of the same amount of voters. It's just fewer of them ended up being Republican and more were Democrats.
How
Some
about
of that
independents, though?
Well, I mean, the independents went 80-20 for Spamberger. And so I don't know if there were more of them. And then also, again, independents, how do you count them? Like a lot of people say, I'm an independent and I just happen to have voted Democrat in the last 20 elections, right? So true independence really broke for the Democrats this year. Again, that sort of Trump effect. And I think what happened in New Jersey is just that, maybe Chitterelli got some more Republicans excited about him, but were so many more Democrats enthusiastic and turning out that it totally overwhelmed any kind of gains he might have made.
Do you
So I
feel like
just
this
think,
was a mini midterm?
yeah, for sure. And I think we'll probably, I mean, again, I don't want to predict what's going to happen. It's a big year up ahead, right? And a lot of things could happen. But if it's anything like this year, right, we're going to see a similar dynamic next year. Trump's still in office. Trump's still like sort of angering people, and he's not running for office. So the people who support him aren't going to turn out. I mean, that's the kind of the story that this past year is that Trump supporters didn't turn out to vote for somebody who wasn't Trump. Right, that was the deal here. That a lot of these folks who are low propensity voters, they don't vote that much, but they vote for Donald Trump. They're not voting for Winsome Earl Sears. They're not voting for Andrew Cuomo in New York. They're not voting for Chitterelli in Jersey. They'll vote for Trump, but they're not interested in these other Republicans.
You argue that, Trump is not polling well with the electorate. Independents, as you had mentioned in Virginia, broke for Spamberger largely. What do you think that the president can do in the next 365 days and some change in the negative in order to turn the tide?
Yeah, I think he's got to go back to the economy. It's the economy, stupid, right? That's the old Bill Clinton saying. And you were asking about that before, right? The people voting with their pocketbooks. I think that Trump kind of lost the thread of what got him into office, right? It was immigration and inflation.
He
That's what he
polls well
ran
with
on.
immigration, despite plenty of questions surrounding tactics advice, but he still polls well.
Well, sure. And I think that the fact that so much, I mean, this is also what the sort of the curse of victory, right? Is that you win and you're doing stuff on an issue. So people sort of move on to the next one, right? It's like, what have you done for me lately? Right. So Trump could try to highlight what he's doing with immigration, but that also, as you're saying, it polls well, but it also drives that polarization because I think a lot of people, it hardens the opposition to him as well. But it's really on the economy. And that's what Spamberger hit him on here in Virginia. It wasn't that Trump is threatening democracy. Trump is threatening immigrants. It's that Trump is chaotic and his tariffs and all the stuff he does. At some point, this economy is going to crash and you're going to be hurt by it. And you're already being hurt by it. I mean, that's what he has to counter, right? He has to figure out what are the economic case for me? What am I doing to help people in their pocketbooks? And I think he's already sort of come up with some ideas about that. Not that they're good ones necessarily, like extending out mortgages, for example, is not a great
50-year
one.
mortgage?
Yeah, I don't think anyone's real excited about that. Like, great, then I'm just going to keep paying until I'm in the grave. It's not a good sell for, I think, Americans. But things like that, right? His economic populism, what he's always been good at. That's what he needs to do.
You talk about what is likely going to what could influence voters leading up to 2026. As you had mentioned, it is a long ways away. A month can change the outcome of an election. An October surprise can change the outcome of an election. Didn't happen in Virginia with Jay Jones with this text scandal that happened. For our listeners who might not be in tune with Virginia races this past year, Jay Jones was the Democratic nominee for Attorney General. Text messages came to light in October, an October surprise from 3 years ago, where he had come up with this situation where he imagined shooting a GOP colleague back in 2022 and saying that violence on politicians' children is only going to change their tune on policy. So even though we have a long ways away right now, what can Republicans do in the legislative branch, controlling the House, controlling the Senate? They've got the White House as well. One can argue that, well, there's a conservative lean on the Supreme Court with 3 Donald Trump appointed Supreme Court justices there. What can they do legislatively to bolster their interests for the midterms? They're all up for grabs.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think they have to be seen as doing something to help the economy. I mean, it's going to be hard because partially, what the shutdown deal, right? The shutdown just ended. The Democrats kind of caved, but they got some concessions from the Republicans. But the Republicans have promised that they're going to hold a vote on extending these healthcare subsidies for Obamacare, right? It's all technical, wonky stuff, but what it's going to look like is at a time when costs are rising, people are worried about how they're going to pay for things. The Republicans are going to have a vote on healthcare, and they're probably going to say no. They're going to say no to extending healthcare benefits to a whole bunch of Americans.
Do you think
Now, whether
that's a fatal decision, considering so many of their constituents in lower income Republican districts that rely on SNAP, that rely on government assistance, that rely on these subsidies to keep their health insurance premiums low?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to go over well. I mean, but this is what the Republicans have committed to, right? They've argued against these subsidies for years. This is part of old Obamacare, right, which is something that's been a real boogeyman on the right for 10 years. And it's going to be hard for them to reverse course. I think that if they have a no vote on healthcare in December, like at the time that people are really worried about prices, that's not going to be good, right? And or if they're not going to do that, right? If they're not going to extend healthcare subsidies, they have to figure out something else to do, something that they can say. Maybe it's tax credits, maybe it's some sort of like but I don't know what it's going to be
Stimulus
because
check?
yeah, it could be stimulus, but again, that's not in the usual vocabulary and the kind of bin of things that Republicans do. And honestly, I think they're going to take their cues from Trump. It's whatever Trump's comes up with, some sort of populism. I mean, I think stimulus spending might be something that Trump would embrace, right? He's never been a real principled conservative, right? It's sort of whatever works for him. So if the idea is let's give out money to people and then they'll like us more, I mean, I think that might be on the table for him. But it's going to have to come from Trump, I think, because I think Republican legislators are letting Trump kind of dictate what they do and what they don't do.
You've had Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of the earliest and staunchest Donald Trump supporters in the last couple of weeks, raise some eyebrows. You have Democrats on social media going, wait, this is the first time I've actually agreed with Marjorie Taylor Greene. Do you think that more Republicans who see their own political future at risk start to oppose the president more publicly if they don't think the economy is getting better?
I think it's possible, and certainly more possible now than it was in the past, right? I think after Trump lost in 2020, there was this thought, all right, well, now Republicans are finally going to abandon him, but he still maintained his position kind of at the top of the party. And so maybe that's changing now, right? He's technically a lame duck. You know, he constantly talks about third terms, but we think he'll be out of office by the end of this term. And there's a limited amount of damage that he can do to Republicans who disagree with him. There could be more folks like Marjorie Taylor Greene who decide, you know what, whatever my political future is, it can't be tied to what we could now think of as a sinking ship, right? A lame duck who has no other option after this. So I've got to find some other way to make my political future. So it's more possible than it was. I still think it's unlikely because he holds so much sway over Republican voters, but we could see more people trying to break with Trump.
Is there really anything Democrats in Congress can do right now to bolster the economy issue? They're out of power. They can say Republicans aren't doing anything, point fingers. We're going to come into office and we're going to change the tide. That's what Donald Trump did in 2024. But arguably, things are not getting better for people right now. But can Democrats tangibly make any changes?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything the Democrats can do. It's all about rhetoric. It's all about framing what the Republicans are up to and attacking Trump, you know, using the bully pulpit, as they say, right? Using their voices wherever they can to try to tie any economic problems to Trump, to try to suggest that it's the Republicans who are doing this to you. Because I think that's the pitch they have to make next year is give us back power in the House, in the Senate, and we'll start taking the fight directly to Trump, and then we can start doing something, at least force him to veto some things if you give us the opportunity to be back in power. But in the meantime, the best they can do is just kind of make the argument as opposed to actually doing anything.
Going on behind the scenes right now to get ready for 2026? What are campaigns working on?
Yeah, I think they're working on their pitch, right? They've seen what happened and what worked, and I think they're particularly going to look at Virginia, right? Because the sheer numbers, right? The sheer switch, it was like a whatever 15, 20 point swing from 2021, and certainly even from 2024 to this year. And Spamberger's campaign, I think, is going to be a model campaign for them, right? Spamberger ran a very disciplined campaign. I've been hearing even Republicans here in Virginia compliment her on how, even boring a campaign she ran, because she stuck on message, was very disciplined. But the key message she had was that Donald Trump is a danger to your pocketbook. So I think the Democrats across the country are kind of looking at, what are we going to do? How are we going to model our campaign? How much like Spamberger can we be, particularly in districts that were either up for grabs or particularly where they're going to challenge Republicans who might be sitting Republicans? I think that's where they're particularly going to target that kind of thing. And then, of course, that's all going in line with redistricting, right? The whole redistricting battle that's going on here in Virginia and a bunch of other states as well. So it's not just about message, it's about how are we going to use the levers of power that we have to try to keep up in this battle with the Republicans for numbers in the House.
Democrats largely used the threats to democracy issue in 2024 to their disadvantage, as we now know how the election turned out for them. Do you think that they're hypocritical right now, playing into this redistricting effort that Texas Republicans rather had started in California, just passed Prop 50 largely? Are they being hypocritical?
I mean, it's a little hypocritical, but it is also, I mean, it can feel a little bit like the fight between the kids and they're like, he started it, no, she started it, right? But the difference is here, we do know who threw the first punch, right? The Republicans did start this. Trump himself going to state legislatures and saying, if you redraw this, we can pick up a few seats, right? They kicked off the battle. And so I think it's unfair to say to Democrats, like, you said you didn't want to do this. And Democrats would say, like, yeah, we're pacifists and someone's shooting at me. What am I supposed to do? Just stand there and get shot? Or should I actually pick up a weapon and get into this war? I think that's a reasonable argument for Democrats to make. Sure, they can say, look, we still don't want to be doing this, but what are we supposed to do? Just let the Republicans who don't have the same scruples as we do go ahead and take over the country. We just can't do that. We have to arm ourselves.
President Trump, in his first 10 and a half months in office, 11 months in office, has put his finger on the levers of the Justice Department, accidentally apparently tweeting or truth socialing a message to Attorney General Pam Bondi that he had wanted some political opponents charged at least more quickly, prosecutions to ramp up. Do you see a world where if Democrats come back into power in the White House, namely, where they might roll back some of these expansions that President Trump has done himself right now to executive power? Or might they say, hey, this is nice, we're in power now, and we can make these decisions?
Yeah. I mean, I think we can look to 2020. I mean, Biden certainly restored some of, using either executive orders or just his own kind of conduct, restored some normalcy to the executive branch. I mean, there's a sort of technical, wonky political science answer to your question, which is executive power has expanded over the last 100 years, and you're not really putting that genie back in the bottle. And so some of the things that Trump does in terms of expanding the scope of executive power is going to stay that way, right? Even Democratic presidents will be like, yeah, I kind of like it that I have a little more control over the bureaucracy, or I can appoint more people or things like that.
Or impose tariffs.
Yeah, for sure. Like, and if the courts are letting the president do certain things, I don't know that a Democratic president is going to be afraid of doing some of those things. But I think some of the more particulars, like directing the attorney general on who to prosecute, like that violates a certain kind of norm about separation of powers and branches that I think Democrats are still more likely to go back to respecting than sort of embracing. So there's a partial expansion of power here that I think the Democrats are going to be happy with, and it's just sort of the new normal. But some of the things that Trump does are not about sort of expansion of executive power. They're breaking the rules, right? And I think Democrats are going to want to restore a lot of those rules.
Let's dive into Virginia really quickly right now. What do you think the Spamberger administration is going to do initially in her term?
Yeah, so the legislature drives a lot of this, right? Spamberger is just kind of have to hold on the rodeo, right? The buck and bronco that is the general session, the session of the General Assembly, which is the first 2 months of the year. It's just a fire hose of bills, and the governor just kind of has to deal with whatever the legislature is doing. In this case, we got a clear idea of what the Democrats are going to do, because Glenn Youngkin, the current governor, has just vetoed 200 bills this year and another 150 the previous year. There's a whole list of things that the Democrats wanted to do that Glenn Youngkin blocked. Well, guess what? Abigail Spanberger is not going to block that stuff. So we're going to see all that stuff come back this year, and Abigail Spanberger is going to be signing. Her arm's going to be real worn out from signing all those bills. That's the sort of the first agenda, I think, for the first 2 months. Now, Spanberger might try to say, here's the things I care about and what I want to shape and influence the legislators to do. Governors quickly learn in our Commonwealth, as well as in some other states, that it's the legislature that's got the real juice. And the governor often has to just kind of react to that. And then I think once the session's over and things settle down a little bit, then Spanberger will give a clearer sense of what she's about and what she's doing.
So you think maybe some of the cultural issues that may be important to her, she's just going to put off at least until the midterms are over?
Well, sure. I mean, but, reproductive rights, that's already on the agenda, right? So there's a right to contraception bill, for example, that the Democrats pushed last year and Glenn Youngkin vetoed. That'll come back. Spanberger will be able to point to that and say, look, I was there for you for reproductive rights. We talked about it. We talked about, abortion and contraception. And here we are, Democrats in the legislature and me in the governor's office, helping to make something happen for you that the Republicans blocked. So we'll see some of those things come up. But again, I think it's going to be tied to these bills that come through the legislature.
Last thing I want to ask you, Rich, what are your students asking you these days? What have they, how have their questions changed in the Trump era as well in your classes at Randolph-Macon?
Yeah, I mean, I wish they asked more questions. The students, probably the youths, right? The youths spend too much time on their phones and all that kind of stuff. But, in my political science classes, certainly, I think we have some curious folks and they're interested in what's happening. But I mean, for my students, it really is kind of like, what is going to happen in the farther future, right? I think they're thinking more like, what are the long-term effects of this? Am I going to have a chance to buy a house like my parents did? Am I going to have, a safe environment to be able to raise kids in? Like, I think they're thinking big picture. They're interested, obviously, in the partisan politics and what's happening across the globe. But I really think what they're looking for is reassurance that, there'll still be a United States of America in 10, 20 years. Yes, there'll still be a place for you to find a job and a home and raise a family. I mean, I certainly feel that way. I'm optimistic about that, but I think they're really concerned about it. They're just scared about the future in the way that I think a lot of people are. So that's really kind of where they are. And when they ask questions about what's happening now, it's kind of, I think it's connected more to that. Like, what's it going to be for me when I'm not here at this campus anymore? And how hard is it going to be?
Do you think that older voters should prioritize that sometimes in their conversations around the kitchen table? A lot of them, especially Democrats, talk about breaking the mold. This is unprecedented, which seems like a cliche at this point, especially in the journalism world. Unprecedented. Do you think older voters should think, or at least vote in a way that is more forward thinking for the younger people if they're not already?
Absolutely. I mean, this is part of the problem in American politics, right? It rewards the people who are there, and that's there's an argument for that, and there's a fairness to that. But the kids don't vote, right? We know this, that young people don't vote in larger percentage, and they, in part, it's because of who they are in their demographics. It's part because I think they feel a little disconnected from politics because they're not being engaged by the older folks who are around, right? Your Gen Xers, your boomers who are still kind of running things. And I think that we do tend to, there's a term of this in economics, like discounting the future, right? We don't often factor in future costs to things. We're focused on the right now. And so I would love a little more forward thinking from our politicians and from our voters, right? Thinking about how am I going to, even if you don't have kids, how are the next generation going to be able to make a living and to have the wonderful things that we had. So yeah, I absolutely would love a little more forward thinking from everybody.
Rich Marr, I appreciate your time. He is a great political voice in Virginia politics, but you certainly have your eyes on national issues, and I appreciate all the work you do at Randolph-Macon College. We go back a couple of years, so I also am thankful for your time here on Byline, Rich.
It's really great to see you again, Ben.
Let's dive into some more headlines. Let's go beyond them, making sense of them without spin. A lot had happened in the last week. Namely, the longest federal government shutdown in history is over. Kaput. How long is it going to be until another one comes about? Well, legislators have just funded the government through January 30th. Then we go through this process again. For now, SNAP benefits will start to be restored. I will get into that in a second. Immediately, headaches to air travel will start to go away. It may take a couple days of this. I talked with an aviation industry analyst who says that delays will start to diminish, cancellations will diminish, but he does not see this prolonging into the Thanksgiving holiday. Federal workers will no longer be furloughed. They will be getting paychecks again, including air traffic controllers, and those SNAP benefits, which we know some states have stepped in and funded SNAP, EBT food stamp program, at least partially, as the federal government has been shut down. But they might face some technical snafus administering the remaining balances that SNAP recipients are owed, because the federal government will have to send that money to the states, and the states will have to facilitate it and calculate some numbers here. So that might take some time. But come the end of January, as we're in 2026, ahead of the congressional midterms, as you just heard my lengthy conversation with Rich about, there will be a lot of legislators walking a tightrope in 2020, some of them putting their nose to the grindstone too, to try and make this economy better, or at least feel better for a lot of people out there. That's going to be top of mind. Also, that lingering issue, healthcare premiums are set to rise next year. You can already go online and calculate how much your insurance is going to go up in 2026. Hundreds of dollars for a lot of people out there, less in other cases. But those Obamacare tax credits, those subsidies that were not funded, extended by Republicans in Congress, that is going to be something the Democrats continue to point fingers about. Bye, bye, bye to the what? The penny. The U.S. Mint has stopped printing a copper-faced Abraham Lincoln. Penny for your thoughts. They are no longer going to be in commission. You'll still be able to cash them in at the register if you're still carrying cash. The penny lived a good life, 200 years in circulation, but there are some reports that retailers like McDonald's, as well as Wendy's and Kroger, are assessing what rounding rules might mean for transactions. We'll have to take a look at that. And who knows how the eradication of the printing of the penny may impact prices on the shelves too. Tensions are rising between the United States military and the Venezuelan military. United States warships have now entered the Caribbean. Venezuela's military is reportedly beefing up their own infrastructure in the region. President Trump and his Department of Defense, Department of War, whatever you want to call it, continues to bomb alleged drug smuggling boats in an effort to curtail the fentanyl deaths that are happening in the United States. There are analysts as well as international diplomats, law enforcement officials claim that fentanyl is not being brought into the United States from Venezuela. Different kinds of drugs might be. But how might this brand new tension between the United States and Latin American country of Venezuela impact security in the region? The United Kingdom has apparently stopped sharing certain intelligence with the United States because they believe that the United States might be violating international law with the bombing of these boats. We won't get too far into the weeds on this. However, there are some new revelations about the relationship between President Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. New emails were released by congressional leaders. A Democrat was just sworn into Congress from Arizona who was not allowed to take the oath of office during the government shutdown. She would be the tie-breaking vote, if you will, in order to release the Epstein files, as they're called. We'll have to see if that comes about in the next couple of weeks. Speaker Mike Johnson reportedly signaled that he wants to hold a vote on releasing the files earlier than expected. The White House continues to deny any involvement whatsoever with the crimes that Jeffrey Epstein committed. They also continue to distance themselves from his relationship with Epstein, to what extent it may have been. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt came out this week and had said that these documents that just came out solidify that President Trump did nothing wrong. Are you listening? Artificial intelligence is taking over social media. You go on there, you can't tell what's real, what's not. Some of the younger folk can do a little better. I myself cannot detect every single thing that is out there. However, it can be deceptive. Lawmakers have not imposed regulations, at least to make sure that AI generated videos have a label saying this is not real. However, there's a brand new survey out saying that a large majority of music lovers and listeners cannot discern what is an AI generated song and what's not. As I do on this podcast, I will tend to read some news as it comes in, so forgive me for looking away. 97% of listeners cannot distinguish between artificial intelligence generated and human composed songs. This is a report by Reuters, according to a Deezer Ipsos survey. The findings of the survey, which polled 9,000 participants across 8 countries, including the United States, the UK, France, Reuters says, highlight rising ethical concerns in the music industry as AI tools capable of generating songs raise copyright concerns. Interesting. Well, you can go on YouTube and you can search for any song in your personal repertoire that you love. Say you love Journey. Say you love Frank Sinatra. Pick a song from their category. Go on YouTube, see if someone's made an AI-generated version with a different singer singing it. I can go on YouTube, and personally, I'm a big Whitney Houston fan. I can find Whitney Houston singing Mariah Carey songs in the style of Whitney Houston with all the runs and riffs. Now, they don't sound 100% similar. Who could recreate Whitney's voice? But you can go on and find a song that was not sung by a specific artist. I am curious to see how the music industry reacts to this as well. I want to dive into this specific topic on Byline. If artists start suing that their likeness, and in some cases likeness, is being used for commercial purposes. If people start selling people's voices, that is going to raise some legal questions. Now, the survey also apparently found that most listeners want a clear labeling on AI-generated music. That makes me suspicious about social media users as well. Do they want these videos to be labeled AI? Why wouldn't you want to protect possibly your grandma or a vulnerable person, a college student, or maybe even yourself from falling into the wrong hands, a trap? Maybe even someone who's trying to steal your money using an AI-generated video. I'm sure that this is also going to be a campaign platform for politicians who are seeking office in the near future of how they are going to make sure that people do not get taken advantage of by artificial intelligence and who can also possibly find a more human experience when they're browsing online. All right, folks. The holiday season is upon us. We will be shopping, some of us until we drop. However, the economy is not great for so many people. Will they curtail their typical shopping habits? The National Retail Federation, as I had mentioned last week, suggests that people will be buying, that they're largely not going to be altering how they spend their hard-earned cash and swipe their credit cards. And this might be a record year, topping $1 trillion in spending for the very first time. Holidays travel is also opening up. As I had mentioned, the delays and cancellations of flights is starting to go away now that the government shutdown has ended, and air traffic controllers are coming back on the job and getting a paycheck. But back on the shopping component, there are the retailers that are offering extended deals beyond Black Friday and Cyber Monday, I'm sure, to try and woo over shoppers who are starting to save some more cash right now and don't have as much discretionary income. That is going to wrap up another edition of Byline with Ben Dennis. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Rich, as well as diving into some recent headlines with questions that I still think need to be answered of how it's going to impact your day-to-day life. That's what I try to do here, going beyond the headlines to make sense of them without spin. I am planning to have an upcoming conversation about how young people can afford a house. It is increasingly difficult for people to find that American dream of home ownership. How we got here, what can change immediately and long term in order to help people achieve home ownership. There's that big headline right now that a possible 50-year mortgage may be an opportunity for people in the future to buy a house in the United States. A lot of debate on that, whether it's good financially for people, especially with those interest rates sticking around for a longer period of time. But I think that this is an important subject. I myself do not own a home. Would I love to? Yes. Can I afford one? No. I know that there are many people out there as well that cannot, that have delayed that dream. So I would like to dive into this conversation. I'm planning to do that within the next couple of weeks, if not next week. But in the meantime, be sure to follow me on Instagram at BroadcastBen. on Twitter at broadcastben_. I'm also on Facebook and TikTok, broadcastben there as well. And feel free to check out my previous conversations on America's role in the international humanitarian realm, as well as making sure that we're staying cordial these days and ensuring and holding our leaders to account that they're staying cordial as they exercise their politics. So with that, have a great week, a great weekend. Hopefully you can take a load off, and we'll see you next time. Take it easy.